Hello, I'm Greg, and I'm here with Jason Storey, and this is just sort of an ad hoc live stream. We just thought we'd get together and talk about Unity game dev stuff. If you are watching, if you could just drop a little chat in the comments and let us know if you can hear us both okay. And Jason, you want to just say hi?
Hey everybody, Jason here. Happy to be here.
Cool. Well, what do you want to talk about?
I don't know. Like I've just been in a bit of a chatty mood. I had a long while there where I wasn't particularly inspired to work on much, and recently I've sort of kicked back into gear, back into Unity, back into a couple website design stuff, and so I've been a bit more engaged in work recently. And so I thought have a chat, see what you're up to as well, and we could maybe come up with something interesting.
Yeah, well, there was no game dev show last week, so I'm glad you reached out. So.
Yeah. I mean, as I said, it's funny. I've been doing podcasts for years, and one of the biggest benefits is not so much for other people. Like, don't worry, I like the fact that other people listen. But the main thing for me is just it's a good way to catch up with people. It's like a little social club. And so for many years, I've always had one or two podcasts on the go, because otherwise it's great hearing what people are working on, and so you end up having a lot of it inspires you, gives you good ideas, and it's always something that kind of good to have around. And so whenever there's been a bit of a drought on something like Game Dev Show, I like to fill the gap with something,
Yeah, I love it. And in addition to the Game Dev Show, I've got a weekly mastermind group.
Me too.
You
Yeah.
jumped on that group with us once, so you know.
Yes, yeah, it was. Yeah.
But the week before last, only one other guy was able to make it, and this past week we ended up canceling since 3 of the other 4 guys weren't going to be able to make it. So, yeah, I'm a little bit hungry for some online interaction with game dev stuff.
Yeah, and I missed my last one as well. There was apparently a really good talk on goal-oriented action planning, and I was like, I would have liked to go to that, because I know the guy. Basically, he's working on a game, and I introduced him to the idea. He was talking about some game feature, and I'm like, that sounds like a GOAP idea might suit you. And I sort of sent him off on a research adventure, and he came back with a really cool report he wanted to give, and unfortunately I wasn't there. So he said that later on we'll record it and put it up. But so for now, I'm again looking forward to that at some point as well.
Yep. So we just got a chat. Roy from Random Precision Software. Do you remember me talking about one of my viewers wanted me to make like a pole position type tutorial? I'm pretty sure that's what he's talking about, making a pseudo 3D road in 2D. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I enjoy creative problem solving for the sake of it. I mean, I've watched a lot of the video essays where people basically recreate a rendering engine using Rays or do the classic fake 3D, 2D thing from the early id Software days. So I always find playing with those things interesting. But on my end, I'm much more interested these days in the user-facing part. I think there's still a lot of unsolved problems in terms of what makes a game fun and why do people play games and what is the identity of games these days, now that we're sort of half mixing in a lot of, slot machine and randomness rules and things. So long story short, as far as the spectrum of problems to solve in game design, there's things that interest me more than sort of creatively exploring the past of how things used to be. I'm much more interested in sort of tackling what makes a thing a fun game these days. Yeah. So for me, it wouldn't be as fun of an idea. But again, from a learning perspective, I love doing any kind of project like that.
Yeah, well, I actually took a couple of stabs at this. I brought it up with our mastermind group. Uri and I had a couple of discussions about it. I found the actual original machine code, language code for, or assembler. It was assembly language code for pole position. And I was actually trying to use AI to kind of, just interpret that and explain all the high level stuff to me. And I also found a JavaScript project that somebody did something very, very similar to pole position. And I was trying to recreate that in Unity. And I kept running into issues. And I just don't have a lot of time to devote to side projects like this. And
I had the same thing. I was looking at two projects similar. I started looking into emulating Game Boy games and sort of writing on an emulator. And there's some great guides. And if it's the original Game Boy, it's surprisingly simple. There's only a small set of instructions. And so I was learning how that worked. And then I got really into the Super Nintendo style Mode 7 stuff. And I wanted to see if I could figure out how to implement that myself. But like you said, there's so many projects. And at some point you have to say, what is this going towards? And if you can't find justification for it, it kind of has to go into the backlog,
Yeah, so a lot of my side gig type stuff has been on the back burner. I haven't put out a video in probably a month, and it had been a month or
Oh, a
two
month.
before the previous video. Yeah, the last one I did was on setting up that GitHub repository that you could deploy through the package manager.
Yes,
And I
yeah.
meant to follow that up with customizing it with like different branches for different projects and stuff. And then following that up with a multi-user template, a multiplayer template. But in the meantime, things have picked up with Legends of Learning. So I'm currently working on a,
That's right. You have a new pitch. I remember you
yeah,
sent me a link to that. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, but I remember you were saying you're working on a new. I remember seeing it was the Constitution, and I'm like, I'm an Irishman. I'm not the right person to really know if that's going to be valuable. But I'm curious at the approach you're taking.
yeah, well, I was in the process. Well, first I was prototyping one around orbits, planetary orbits and stuff. And I had gotten a really nice workable prototype done for that. And then somebody stole the last slot in that learning objective before I could get it. So then I grabbed another slot for sound waves, teaching about sound waves. And it was actually a game where you would ride like a transverse wave.
Classic, yeah, line rider.
Yeah,
That's
and you would adjust the amplitude and frequency to change, your speed and your depth of your peaks. And then they reached out to me because they opened up some new slots for social studies, and I was looking at them, and it takes you like from colonial times on to like the Great Depression. And I grabbed the slot for where you're creating the Constitution. So it starts where the colonies are under the Articles of Confederation. So it's after the Revolutionary War. And it teaches all the flaws and shortcomings of the Articles and why we need it to draft a new Constitution. And then all of the big debates and arguments that were basically blocking us from ratifying a Constitution, like representation for the states, large states versus small states, the whole slavery issue, Western expansion, all these different things, the currency. And so I was trying to think of how I could teach that concept. And what I came up with was just a dialogue system like in Skyrim where you interact with NPCs and they'll say something, they'll have a problem. And then you have a number of possible responses. And then they'll come back, depending on how you respond, they'll come up with something else. And you can basically acquire quests or tasks or objectives. And you can help resolve debates for one side or the other through your responses. And it's a game you can't really win or lose. It's just going to gently guide the player ultimately to the desired outcome so they can ratify the Constitution. And there's a lot of mini
Yeah.
games in there too, like continental currency exchange, things like that. So
I do think that's a good approach. I remember when I was a kid, I read a book. I wish I could remember the name of it, but it was actually a fictional story about a philosopher trying to talk about some ideas they cared about, but it was set in Rome. And I remember the whole time, I was really just enjoying the book and the character and all of their personal family dramas and things. And then by the end of it, I was like, wait a minute, that book was teaching me the whole time. And I was like, by the end of it, I knew a lot about, the Roman forums and all of how that worked. It was sort of, they managed to sneak in because when you're telling a story like that, you've got a person living a lifestyle. They talked about the currencies and the bathhouses and all that stuff. And it was just fascinating how you came away from it going, because it wasn't trying to tell me information, it was telling me a story within a universe. I ended up coming away with it, with a lot more out of it. And I had the same reaction when I read the book, The Goal, by Elijah Goldratt. It's kind of about manufacturing, and effectively it's teaching you about systems operation and how to deal with sort of large complicated systems, but it's done through the lens of a guy going back to his old small town and trying to get the factory up and running, and he's having marital problems with his wife. And because you're so engrossed in the story, you don't notice how much you're learning about the process of what's going on. So I'm a big fan of stories where it's the environmental side that teach you.
yeah, so it's kind of like an RPG, but without the combat and not so much exploration. I mean, you're going to have to go from like this town to that town. You'll go into like shops or whatever, but
what are you going to use for the dialogue type system? Because I imagine that's going to be a big part of it.
That's the big part. Yeah. So I was actually using Bezi, that integrated AI for Unity, to generate a dialogue system, including a inline editor where I can construct these dialogues, add dialogue entries, add responses, and then link them to more dialogue entries, and it builds it out. And it will even generate the entries for the localization file, because all the text has to be localized.
Yeah.
And it will generate all the JSON to plug into that language.json file. And then I thought, well, let me see if I can make a visual node editor for it too. And it gave me.
Oh, you're saying it? Yeah, nice.
Passable. Yeah.
Yeah, I gave Busy a try myself, and it's fine. Like, I don't hate it or anything. I was a bit disappointed that they have rich integration. They have a plugin for Unity, and it's connected. And so why am I having to copy and paste and create scripts? Like, it's
so that's on the roadmap, is to have it automatically update the scripts and game objects. It was in there and they took it out, so they must have had some technical issues.
I was wondering, because it's like, I mean, as programmers ourselves, of all of the features, that's like 3 lines of code. So it's just writing a single write to file. So I was kind of surprised to see that felt like a missing feature. So
yeah, we use something at work called Jolt AI. And it integrates with Visual Studio Code. It might integrate with Rider now. But it will, like, it'll update multiple files at once. Like, say I say, add an API endpoint to do blah, 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 blah. You know, it will create, like, the models, the APIs, the controller classes, everything. And then you can apply them individually, or you can just say apply all, and it'll do it all for you, and then you just got to go and tweak things. And it's really good at things like scraping your repositories and generating like Markdown for API documentation and stuff like that. It's really cool.
Yeah, that was my reaction to trying Cursor for the first time. Is when I first, properly using Cursor, because when I first installed Cursor, I was like, this is just Visual Studio with a plugin. I don't really understand its value proposition. I don't know why everyone raves about it so much. But then I was recently rebuilding my website, and I gave it a proper go, and I was like, okay, let's really solve a problem. And as I think I mentioned to you before, I did web dev like 9 years ago, and so I'm well out of date. My patterns and practices are very much still in the Angular phase, where it's all still using their routing solutions. And so this day and age, it's mostly everyone uses React and Next.js and Tailwind and all of this stuff. And I was like, I have to learn all of this and also try to work with it. And so while I was learning it, I was like, okay, I'll kind of get a handle on it now. It's following similar patterns. There's an interesting client-server model. Anyway, so I tried Cursor, and I was able to describe entire feature sets, and it would write 4 or 5 different files, move them to the right locations, even run NPM for me, create builds, pull in packages. I would say, how would I approach this problem? And it would say, well, there's 4 different packages that do it different ways. One example is on my snippets website, I have a command palette. So again, I use Obsidian a lot, and I like that sort of pop-up modal dialogue. And I'm like, well, how would I go about doing that? And even back in my day, there was JavaScript libraries for things like that, but they were all very bespoke. They weren't really locked into different platforms. And nowadays, there's libraries which are like built on React components. So they integrate very tightly into what's going on with all of the state system and the context. And I was like, what should I use? And it says, there's 2 that are particularly good. Do you want to try this one? And I fully pulled down the packages, added it to the project, made a demo. It did break some of the styling at first, but you can go back and forth on it. And that's the bit that really surprised me, is if you're using the live edit stuff, you can have it open on a second browser, and you can basically say, add more spacing, change the color of the icon, move it to the right side, and it'll just write it for you, and you'll see it change in front of you. And granted, it's mostly just shuffling around Tailwind classes. It's not like the end of the world in terms of complexity, but it is just fascinating being able to say, I would like to see it look this way, and then watch it happen. And it's an impressive thing, you know? Yeah,
you can even paste in screenshots and stuff. Like we'll paste in a Figma diagram and say, give me a web page that looks like this, and it'll get you 90% of the way there. We use Material UI. We just switched to using Material UI at work for our styling. So we had to describe what we want and say, give me the, modify this page to use Material UI for its styling and point it to our style guide and stuff.
Yeah, the one I'm really interested in is V0 recently. So Vercel I use Vercel for my hosting, and V0 is their AI platform. And unlike the others, which are just sort of using existing models like ChatGPT, V0 is an entire model they made for themselves. They've got 2 custom models, and they're expressly training it on those technologies, React and Next and that kind of thing. And so I'm kind of interested in checking that one out soon because it feels like it's literally built around the kind of tools, and you'll hopefully get a lot less hallucinations. Because the problem I do have is the website changes so fast that I literally say, give me the example of this library, and it'll write code, and then I'll go to the website and the code's different, and they're like, oh, that's the old version. And it's like, that's happened 3 or 4 times because the API has changed in just a matter of months. And some of these are, again, 4 or 5 year old technologies. So if a more modern one trained to be used recently might be a better fit. So I'm kind of looking forward to giving that one a go sometime soon.
Have you used Gemini at all?
Yeah, Gemini Flash is my go-to for conversation. It's the one I have. I use Misty as my local client, and when I'm doing general questions, that's the one I use. And it's so fast. Like it's.
Yeah. Well, since I have a Google Business account, for Midnight Oil Software, I get Gemini for free. And I think
I have it on my phone as well. I think because something to do with some deal with Samsung. I think I get it for free on the phone, but I mostly use it on the. Yeah.
You have an Android?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm in the Apple ecosystem. So.
Right.
But yeah, I use Gemini a lot for my Legends of Learning stuff. So they gave me this learning objective document, and it had all these other reference documents for source materials, like the Federalist Papers, Anti-Federalist stuff, James Madison's notes from the convention, and different things. And I fed it the template that they gave me for the GDD, which is a Google Docs document, which is perfect for Gemini because it's in Google. And I said, first of all, I said, give me 10 game ideas for how to gamify this source material, and it gave me some different ideas, and I iterated on that a few times. And then after I had fleshed out the different pieces, Roy is leaving. Thanks for joining. After I gave it all those pieces, I said, spec out a game design document following this template using everything that we've decided so far. And it generated so much of the content, and it followed the template to the letter. I had to copy and paste from what it gave me into the template just to make sure everything was formatted correctly and everything. But I've been using it to iterate on like the mini games. The only thing it's not super good at is the image generation. It will do image generation, but I still find Midjourney to be a little bit better for that.
Yeah, I use Construct these days. It's the new one based off of Flux. And it's very fast, and it seems to have as good as pictures, and you're not waiting for 5 million years like ChatGPT. Images. Yeah.
Yeah, the other issue that I ran into that I have not found a good solution for is generating sprite sheets. Giving it an image and saying, okay, I want a sprite sheet with idle and walk animations. It just can't do it. I have not found a single tool that can do that yet.
Yeah, I think that'll be a tough one. You could do it with a custom Comfy UI workflow, but basically what you do is you would create stickman poses for each of the standard poses you'd want, and then you would use a control net adapter to say, I want you to follow the forms of this shape, and then you would use prompts that would then basically align characters on top of those poses and retain the shapes. So it would take a little bit of setup to do, but it would be doable. You could build a pipeline for that. I haven't done it for myself, but I have done it for like Pokemon card style things where I had a very specific, must be this framing, must be within this sort of slot for the shape, must have this camera angle and focal length, and then I had every character pose was roughly the same, and then I could generate a whole bunch of characters and creatures under different things. So again, the Comfy UI is all, you can do almost anything because it's literally a workflow builder, but it's certainly not easy. It's very much like take some time.
UI, huh?
For which?
You said
Comfy,
construct?
sorry, Comfy UI. So COMFY, Comfy UI.
Oh, okay.
So basically what Comfy UI is it's a node-based editor built in Python, and it connects to everything. Every one of these AI generators. The idea being that you build in the same way you'd build a node workflow, you'd build the same thing in this. You would say, load up this model, and it can be the free models, or it can be web models, it can be any. There's providers for everything, because it's open source. You pull down one of these, and then you pipeline it through and say, on generated model, go to this plugin. And there's things like GANs, the adversarial networks, or there's masks, and you basically can build a thing saying, take this, mask this, pipe it out here. And the one I was describing is you have a second image saying, this is a body form for how to match to a body shape. And then you say, take the output image, take the map shape, build a new image out of it, and then you can pass it into an upscaler, which then does another phase, and so on and so on. And then what's really cool is the whole thing is defined by JSON configs. And so if you go online, you can find other people's entire graphs of like 40 nodes that represent some workflow, and just copy and paste the JSON file, drop it directly into yours, and it'll even say you're missing these plugins, you want to install them, and you can then go through and decide which ones you want, and then there you go, you can run it locally. So there's a lot of really interesting ones out there for even like image to video, where it'll like take a video, split it into frames, pass each frame in one by one, perform whatever operations you want, and restitch it back to a video. It's sort of the most powerful like cross AI tooling thing. And it's not just for pictures or video, it also does stuff like you can pass in a live webcam if you want to use that for a source, or what I often use it for is string wildcarding. So it's got parsers where you can pass in a string and have a file representing sort of different variations. And so the example I used was I have a file for different hair lengths or different haircuts or different eye colors. And so when I write the prompt, I don't write the full prompt. I write a character with hairstyle and eye color of whatever, and it'll auto string replace on every iteration. And then I can have it build a what's called an XY plot, which is sort of like XY axis. You pick two different properties and it will generate a variation along the axes. And you can then see what does each model or each seed or each variation of a prompt give you across each axis. And it's a great way to compare. You can just leave that run for a while, come back and see a lot of options. So if you're trying to decide on a architectural style or a different color, you can just sort of run the thing 12 times, see what it does, come back and then compare it and so on. So again, it's very much an entire like programming platform, but so it's a lot more than these sort of much simpler web tools, but it's free, local, you can do whatever you want with it. And because it's all Python, you can literally open the folder, drop your own Python script in, it makes a node, you can make your own inputs and outputs, connect to whatever service or API you like, and you're off to the races. So it's if you're really building workflows out of it, it's that like I don't think there is a better tool. But to be honest, I use that rarely. It's kind of because it's so complicated. It's one of those things that the closest I ever really would use it practically is I'd use it for image recognition, where I will basically eat a folder of images from screenshots I've taken, have it go through identifiers. Identifiers will write descriptions, add descriptions to the metadata, add tags, and then auto ingest into Eagle and then set the tags up correctly. So I can have like an auto folder parser. But since I did that, Eagle introduced their own native tagging and stuff. And so now I just use theirs rather than my own workflows.
So you still use Eagle, huh?
I still use Eagle. I admit it's frustrating me. It's hitting limitations on some of the stuff I want to do. And so I'm using it less than I used to just because the folder system structure is very limiting. And so I'm also finding now that I'm doing my own web stuff again, a lot of this I can just make myself, which is why like with my snippet library, I couldn't find a good tool for that. And I just wrote my own. And I'm beginning to think if I store all of my data in a headless CMS, I can probably just make my own web interface for a bunch of my own stuff. And so I'm kind of humming and hawing. I still use it for tagging sort of like asset purchases. I don't just mean Unity. I mean, sometimes I have LUT packs I bought back when I was doing video camera work, or I had PDF templates for when I was learning Markdown, and there's other like courses where I followed sample code stuff from Pluralsight. So I have a whole load of things that I've purchased at some point or other, and I have them all tagged and labeled, and it's a good way to have a backup. But if it's images in particular, for example, I find that because it's a real pain to access their folder structure, I've started moving that into what's called Image, which is sort of like a local Docker hosted version of Google Photos. And I have my own entire setup for that now. So I go to a web page that's actually locally hosted. I drop my images in just like Google Photos, and it auto tags and face identifies and stuff. And then I have my own server for that. It's not exposed to the web. I was thinking about doing that, but I did try setting up Tailscale and a few others, but I just didn't care enough. So yeah, long story short, I have different tools for different jobs. I probably have about 20 different apps that do different things. Eagle's in there somewhere, but I would say it's not as prominent as it used to be.
Yeah, I mainly use Eagle just for music and sound effects, you know, from all the different packages, whether they're Unity packages or Humble Bundles or whatever. But I'm finding that asset inventory too is working pretty good for me.
Very good, yeah.
I'm
a big fan. Yeah.
Sometimes where it will say this isn't cached yet, you have to download, and I can't preview something. And even if I've downloaded something and cached it, I'll pick something like an image and I'll drag it into my hierarchy, and it might take 4 or 5 minutes before it actually brings it in. And I don't know why. So.
I admit that was one of my limitations, is I noticed that it does not like the network because it's got so much small meta files, and it made the, in my opinion, poor decision of having a folder-based structure where each file has a meta file associated with it, which has the metadata. It means it balloons the size, where if you've got 10,000 files, you've now got 20,000 files. And as a result, when you're using it on a remote drive, and so that's what I have all of my stuff on a server machine in another room, and it basically just, it constantly hiccups and has issues, and it just made me question, like, again, it's great locally for certain stuff, but I was kind of going, they've made too many compromises here that don't do quite what I want for the scale I want for stuff. So
yeah, mine is on a NAS, so it's going over the network. I'm sure that's part of the problem. But I have so many assets, that I just can't put it on an onboard drive.
mm-hmm.
I'm actually thinking of upgrading my Backblaze subscription to get the plan that will allow me to back up my
Per year?
NAS.
Oh yeah. Oh, I haven't done that myself. So my cheeky version of that is, I thought about doing that, but because it's priced by terabytes, I didn't like the scaling on that. Especially when the kind of client user version is infinite, providing it's within reasonable, like, your own stuff and not sort of whatever. So I found a cheekier option is to switch from a NAS to a DAS, so direct access storage. And that's just a fancy way of saying it's a box that houses a load of drives, but then plugs into a computer. And so rather than being a separate machine. And I also like that because the NAS I was using, quite frankly, was quite slow. And I have an old machine with two 1080s in it, which is going to blow out of the water the really crappy Synology NAS thing I have. And so I was like, let's just do that instead. So I bought two of these. I bought a bunch of 20 terabyte drives, plugged those in, and they're just drives. So they're perfectly within the reasonable rights usage on
So you
Backblaze.
have an extra machine. It's basically just like a headless server sitting on your network, and you have all your drives in it.
Yeah, it's like an external dock drive thing. It's I can send you on the name. It's Terra something. But yeah, there's basically a Terra D5, I think is the product name. But basically, yeah, it stores two hard drives and then two SSDs. And so the SSDs are like the quick write cache, and then the hard drives are the long-term storage. And then all in, I plug that in as one thing. It shows up as drives, and then I synchronize it. And then again, they appear as drives on the computer. And so that other computer is my Backblaze computer, and I have that synced in perpetuity. And I did check up with them. They said they've got clients who are, storing up to like 12 petabytes. And so my measly 60 terabytes is not going to be a blip for them, relatively speaking. Not that even I'm using that much. Right now, I'm currently using like 15, but I've got storage for 60, and I like that. And that's now got me pretty comfortable. And about 20 of that is fast because it's like some combination of writing to a cache or whatever. So I would say
This NAS can
at
plug
scale,
directly into a computer too. So I think my NAS can plug directly into a computer if I want.
Yeah. That's basically what this is. This is you can either plug into the network, or you can plug directly in. The one thing to watch out for though is you're still going to be bottlenecked by the speed of the actual connection. And so one frustrating issue with the one I have is it is not using Thunderbolt. And so even though it's got like 5 drives in it, its throughput is still USB 3.0, which isn't bad. It's like 100 and whatever. It's 300, but realistically 100 or whatever for the use case. So it's fine, but the fact that there are multiple drives in there that it could be writing in parallel, that theoretically I could be reaching, and it's mostly backups. And so for me, it works most of the time for what I need. So,
Well,
but anyway, the TLDR on that is basically, I would rather spend a couple hundred on another box with some drives in it that then mean I don't have to pay per terabyte in Backblaze. Now I still pay my single fee, 100 and something Backblaze, and then the little extra I pay for the 1-year backup, and then that's it. And it doesn't matter how many drives I get, the power's back in my control. And I like the idea so much, later on I got a second one of those DASs. So basically there's 2 boxes that are external drives effectively with their own power brick, plugged in, they're just plugged directly into the computer, and then I expand the storage whenever I want by buying more drives. Simple enough.
I'll look into that to see if it's cost effective for me. Well, going back to the Sprite thing I was dealing with, do you know of any good tools that can take like a face-on Sprite and we're not talking about high poly, right? Just,
Mm-hmm.
not pixel art, but still, kind of cartoony, full on face on sprite, and give you profile and rear poses, perspectives, maybe give it to you in a T pose.
I have heard there's a new one. It's not Eraser. It's Eraser. There's some one I've seen. I haven't had much use for it myself, but I've seen it. I keep up to date in what the latest products are, and it's like a dashboard thing that people would create images, drop them into this, create multiple poses at different facial angles, and then use that to feed into VO3 to make sort of video shots with consistent angles and characters. And so there are some tools. I don't know if they're working well for pixel art or characters, but I'll send you on a list of a few that I've heard are good, but I don't really do a lot with generative AI actually, in terms of day to day. It's something I'm I think the phrase we said before is it's like a train. You're either on it, in front of it, or under it, and so I'm going to keep up with it, but it's not something I have much use for personally. So I don't really use it. I still can't give much of a kind of a case study,
Yeah, for my Legends of Learning game, I implemented a click and move interface. So it's basically kind of like NavMesh navigation, but I'm doing it myself using A-Star pathfinding. And I did all that with Bezier too. I had it basically where I can define walkable areas just with colliders. And then I can click somewhere and it would walk to that point and walk around obstacles. But I want to animate the sprites when they're walking. So one thing I thought, if I could just split a sprite up into body parts and do skeletal animation, that would
puppeting it that way. Yeah,
that would be one way to do it. The obvious easiest way is just to have maybe 4 frames for a walk animation and just cycle through them. But then I got to orient it depending on which direction they're facing. So I'd have different sprites for those, but
so I would say
over a dozen characters is the thing.
Well, what I would do, here's my sort of cheeky answer to how I'd solve that, is AI is not very good at generating things consistently, but it is very good at modifying things you have with weights. And so if you got an asset of like a generic robot type character, and you posed them and you took shots of each of them in this exact pose that you want representing each frame of the animation, and built your own pseudo tile map that is literally, this is that character in each of these poses, with very little identifiable details, you could literally hand it an image of a character face on and say, make this character across the styles, and you'll get much better results because it's really good at sort of painting one onto the other. And so in general, what you want to do with those kinds of things is not try to get it to generate frames, but to give it a template of all of the frames you would need, give it the style you want, and then say transfer style. And so in your case specifically, because again, this used to be what games like what was it called again? It's not Dead Cells. Dead Cells is a game which looks pixelated and cartoony, but it's 3D models. They just have a stylistic shader effect, and they generate things out. And so for them, same thing. They made a 3D model. They had the character animated to do the poses they want, saved it out as frames, took the frames, and then granted in their case, it was like shader effects and paint overs and GIFs and stuff. But functionally the same thing is you could do that, and you'd have a much better foundational point to do AI generation out of, rather than sort of whole cloth,
Yeah. And you're aware of the constraints for Legends of Learning, that the uncompressed build size has to be less than 30 megabytes. So whenever I'm bringing images in, I'm making them as small as I can, and I set the import settings, the texture settings, to be like as low as I can go, where it's not looking horrible with crunch compression. I set the quality as low as I can.
I assume you mean using sprite atlases, right? Not like native images.
Right.
Yeah, because again, I don't know how familiar people are, but if you use a normal sprite, that's fine. You can apply crunch compression and so on the sprite. But if you make a sprite atlas with a bunch of sprites in it, you can still use the standard sprites as you normally would, but at build time it'll swap it out for all the instances. So you'll only package the sprite atlas, and so it's usually advised not to put the settings on the sprites themselves. Have all of them at default, so it doesn't wreck the image compression, and then only put the compression on the sprite atlas, so the sprite atlas does the compounding on the raw image. So, but even then, it's still a large file, but it's the difference between possibly 70 megabytes and maybe 3, right? You can get a really a lot less out of it.
Yeah. Yep. So the other thing I was doing to try to optimize was, the font atlases that they give you are extremely bloated. And I create my own TextMesh Pro fonts using TTF files that I get from whatever font source. And I actually use AI to find good fonts for this time period. And I got
thankfully I have we talked about bought assets before. I literally have a pack of about 12,000 fonts that for years ago I got, and I now have like an entire library of those for same reason, just a one time I wanted to solve the problem, not think about it again. So
but when you create a TextMesh Pro font, you can specify all the point size and all these different parameters, and AI is really good at telling me what I can try to optimize it for size.
The risk, of course, being bleeding, right? If you mess with it too much, you end up getting that really annoying bleeding into the neighboring tiles, and you get weird stuff and artifacts.
Yeah, and you also got to make sure that you pick the character set that's going to give you all the characters you need, but none of the ones you don't need.
Yeah, right. Otherwise, you're paying for the entire cost of all the extra characters. Yeah.
So that's actually I finally got that workflow down to really improve those font sizes. But audio files. One here's really annoying thing about Unity. I could take an audio clip and pull it into Audacity, and I could decimate that thing to where it's almost nothing. It doesn't matter. Unity doesn't care. As soon as I pull that into Unity, it expands it. And it's like there's no point at all in trying to optimize an audio clip outside of Unity. The best you can do is change the settings in Unity once you have it in there to try and, get it to, when it goes into the build, to be as small as you can get it. And that's very limiting. You're limited to maybe 2 1-minute clips for this build constraint for Legends of Learning. So like I can't have different background music for every scene unless I'm going to have like a 15-second clip that loops, right?
Well, the other trick, you could always go the old Game Boy route, which is go MIDI, right?
Oh yeah,
create MIDI maps. That would give you infinite sounds. I mean,
the only problem I might run into with that will it work on all the devices they need to support?
I don't see why not. Because even if it is MIDI, it doesn't have to be a full, like, some of these can just be MIDI simulators. So you can just have like, it just plays sounds matching the MIDI track players. I know there's something called Audio Helm on the Asset Store. I'm sure there's others. But for example, like, this is a silly one, but it's one that I always found quite inspiring, is when you play the original Game Boy Pokemon, all the creatures have their roar sounds. And if you counted 151 Pokemon with all of their roar sounds, that would be literally larger than the size of the entire game. And so the way that actually works is there's a bunch of bit flags for each character. What species is it? Is it male or female, etc., etc., etc. And it uses that to create a little hash, and the hash is used inside of the MIDI generator to modify a bunch of values, like pitch up and down, or whether it's in a certain like octave and whatever. And so all of the creature roars are generated from sets of data based on the thing. So there's actually no file storage for any of these at all. And it's quite interesting because it's only like the end result is the like 4-byte description of a Pokemon's raw statistics. Well, like sans actual stat numbers, but like the flyweight version of it, I guess, is enough to generate all the different sounds for it. And so certain creatures will be the same and certain ones will, but it's also good because it keeps them, grass types roughly sound the same, and so too do different regional ones, because they're using the right sort of the iteration on those different types. So yeah, something like that could be kind of cool, where you sort of have some broad set of like rules.
But that wouldn't be MIDI. That would be more synthesizer, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I guess what I meant by that purely is more principally a generative sound from some rule set, right? Because
got it.
Because what you can do with something that really kind of opened my eyes to this a while back, when I was doing things like colors for characters and things, is sometimes you want a bunch of different characters and you want them to have consistent colors. I want a unique color for every character, but I don't want to make a giant array in database and set them myself. And so I just use the hash code, index into an array, modulus the hash ID number, and it will get me a quote unquote unique instance per each index in the array. Or if I don't want duplicates, I would then take the hash, split it up into 3 256 values, and then use that for the RGB values, and then possibly clamp within ranges. In short, there's loads of ways to take a bunch of data flags on an object, create a unique hash or ID, and use that in anything, pitch generators and color generators and whatever. And so you can save an awful lot of storage by just deciding maybe I won't like make an array of hats or outfits. Maybe I'll just have a bunch of subcomponents and I compose them in real time based on this, that, or the other, you know?
Yeah, I'm definitely
the other
open
option, I
to
guess,
ways
is
to optimize.
I think we talked about this before. I don't know what the limitations are for Legends Learning on that, but I know it has to be small for loading, but a lot of this stuff you can always load afterwards, right?
No.
Like not.
So you can't use addressables. You can't do any kind of streaming, unfortunately. That was one of the first things I wanted to do when I first started working on my first game, and you can't do it. There's something about the way their harness works that it runs in, which is unfortunate. The other thing that's kind of unfortunate, you know, there's TTS, which is really cool. There's just an API call that they give you, and I think under the covers, oh gosh, what is the service they use?
There was Microsoft, and there was
I think there's an AWS
they bought Dragon.
service. Anyway, whatever TTS service they use, you could just pass it an API key for which voice to use, but Legends of Learning only supports one voice. It's a female
right,
voice.
okay.
It's like this generic female voice. So obviously in a game about the Constitution where you have different characters you interact with, like James Madison, Alexander Hamilton.
You want different male voices, yeah.
I would love to have some different voices, but I'm only going to have the one choice. Now they've talked about on their Discord, people have requested the option to have different voices, and they've expressed technical reasons why that would be difficult to do.
I don't see how passing in a parameter for a string that gets forwarded directly to their API is difficult. That sounds a little bit like an excuse to me. But.
Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, so I added a mute button to the dialogue to turn off TTS. I mean, what's really cool is the same key that I use to get the text to render is the same key that I would pass for the TTS. And so all I have to do is whenever I want it to say something, I just give it that key into the JSON, the language.json. But I have a little button to turn it off if they don't want to hear it. So if they don't want to hear James Madison speaking as a generic woman, they can just turn that off.
Yeah. I admit, I applaud your willingness to work under such constraints. Obviously, when I work on client projects, I'm limited to whatever they choose, but where possible, I can usually convince people to make sane choices. I tend to not be stuck in too much ruts of awkward scenarios, and it feels to me like they've bottlenecked not just the ability for people to make the things they want, but overall it's going to hamper the quality that anyone can produce even with good intentions. And I do firmly believe that, you know, constraints can lead to quality, but there is a limit where, given how much of an advancement technology has gotten, to put limits that put you firmly in the Game Boy era is kind of a bit silly to me. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know that it has to run on low-end Chromebooks and like 6th generation iPads in their WebGL games. But yeah, I'm not sure why the 30 megabyte uncompressed build limit. I don't know why it's that stringent. You've got to have at least 30 frames per second in your game. So, and on the
I imagine given how little assets you can have, that's not as hard to hit because you literally can't load enough assets.
It's not going to be hard. It's interesting. I was very ambitious in my Math Munchies Mayhem. It was 3D. You know, I was using.
Yeah, I remember you had issues with all of the different numbers, 3D numbers. Yeah. Yeah,
and not just the numbers, but the characters, the VFX and stuff. I mean, I was pretty ambitious in that game.
And you had to cut back a lot of it later.
Get me a cheap Chromebook off eBay just to be able to test it, to reproduce their performance issues.
Yeah.
This one I think would be a lot easier to stay under to get the FPS to be performant.
It's just funny to me how, again, I was making ActionScript 2 Flash games like 12 years ago, and I didn't have this much constraints in the production of those games, right? I was able to make tower defense games with as many assets as I liked because they're all hand-drawn sprites inside of Flash. So yeah, like you were able to produce pretty dramatic things. I mean, look at Castle Crashers, right? That's like completely full of custom assets and things. And that was all in. I think those games were still under 50 megabytes or something, which the fact that that would not be allowed is kind of funny to me.
Well, it takes me back to my roots, Jason, because, I taught myself the program by writing games on the Commodore 64 in BASIC. So, after the OS, you only had like 32K of RAM, right? And I actually had to get a basic compiler that would compile the game down to P code to get my games to run once they grew to a certain point. And then when I started working, in DOS, making games in Turbo Pascal, I had to use overlays because, you couldn't load everything in at once. And I had to be very careful not to introduce thrashing where this overlay is calling this overlay and then they, are calling each other back and forth.
It's interesting too, looking at the history of a lot of games and all the different performance hacks they've done. I mean, classic ones come to mind where the cloud texture in Mario is the same as the bushes in all of the older Mario games. It's just painted green. In Zelda Ocarina of Time, the opening room Link wakes up in is a photograph. It's just a 360 image. It looks different than the rest. Certain textures are using different addressed rectangles into the texture mats. So there's part of wall textures that are the exact same as closed dress textures. They're just rotated onto like different parts of dresses. So they're using it's the same texture coordinates for vastly different things, and which was a real hell for modders who wanted to upscale things, because literally they would change something and it would completely change other parts of the game in unrelated ways. Then obviously the PlayStation era, where so much of that stuff is your pre-rendered backdrops and stuff, which means you're trading memory, but that was the trade-off. They had disks with 700 megabytes, so they had a lot of memory, but then very little performance, and so they had to trade off one for the other. So it's an interesting history of looking at how all of these different problems were solved.
Yep. We had to be clever back in those days. We didn't have pretty much unlimited disk space, and in fact, I had I can't remember where I got it, but it was a little cartoon. And it said "Disk Space: The Final Frontier."
Yeah, and these days it's completely the other way around. I find myself constantly going, hell, let's just cache more and more, because the more you can cache, you can easily take up tons of memory and then not pay for the performance at runtime. I find myself really enjoying, even with text search. I think I was talking about this. I had a little app with just a search box thing. And I'm like, hell, I will literally 10x this. I'll store 50 megabytes, but I can store huge pre-cached calculated indexes, and then the text becomes O of 1, lightning fast across huge databases of numbers, because I've already set up all the stuff. And so you can have a Pokedex that works in real time, and as opposed to complicated, slow searches. And so more and more I find myself reaching to pre-compute it. We have lots of memory now to play with.
Yep. Well, did you have anything you wanted to show off, with the web stuff you're working on, or?
Not really. Not that comes to mind, unless you want to give a play test of the site and tell me your thoughts. I don't know if you've seen it, the coding one I was working on. If you want to give that a look and see if you're interested.
Is there one you pasted the link for in the Discord?
Yeah. That's the one. I rather than me showing things off, I like to see other people use it to see their pain points and stuff. But that was the last thing I worked on, I guess, is sort of public-facing stuff. I'm currently working on a game jam project with somebody for an internal game jam, and so I can't really show anything of that just yet. But yeah.
So is it the code.jasonstory.com?
That's the one. So for people not to know while you're pulling that up, I've been looking for a code snippet library manager thing for a long time, and I've tried a bunch of them. There's Pieces OS, which is horrible. There's Mass Code, which is pretty good, but there's a few I just didn't really like a lot of them. And after years of getting frustrated, when I started building my own website, I was like, I'll just make my own. And so I put this together in a few days as my custom snippet manager. It's not like a product. There's not other people can't upload things or anything, but it's just what I'm currently using to surface and show my code snippets for myself, to basically be able to keep track of code snippets I use. And so I decided while I'm doing that, I might as well let other people see them if they're interested. And so here's a little app I made, basically, where it's snippets I find myself going back to regularly, or as I come up with new snippets I write in code, I'll drop them in here. So
yeah, this is awesome. I'm going to definitely find myself visiting this page. And
I'm about, I think, 5% through my snippet library, because all I did is I grabbed 5%? One JSON file where I had and just dumped a bunch of them up. But this is years of stuff where I've done little test projects on Fmod or I had a tower defense stuff I was working on. So for various projects, whenever I had a snippet of code I quite liked, I would just sort of keep it in a side thing. And so uploading it here, I've only covered 2 categories at the moment. I've covered the stuff roughly around color and the stuff roughly around easing. So that's all that's really there at the moment. But I have like a bunch of stuff for AI, for nav meshes, for string searching, for all sorts of stuff. And so as I find time, I'll upload them all, and it'll be a bit more robust, I think.
So I'm looking for like a search box. Is there a search box?
Yeah. So if you press so first press Z, and it'll hide the 2 sidebars because just to keep it simple.
Okay.
And then if you press Control K, it brings up your classic input search, and you can.
Okay.
This is sort of more how I would use it on a regular basis, and then you can sort of pick stuff there and keep a look at the snippet. And then if you click the share in the top right of the code snippet, it copies the code block. But if you hit the one at the top right, it copies the link to the URL to share the URL. So that you can basically copy.
So this copied the URL, but this would copy the code snippet.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. And then if I wanted to show the sidebar,
so
Control K.
The Z is the toggle on this, or you can just hit the arrow in the corner of them. And then I have a bunch of different, as you saw, filters. I've got folders, tags, and languages.
I saw that.
And if you look at the bottom right, there's a bunch of other settings I've kind of hidden away that are kind of a bit overkill. And so if you want to like turn on other views or change the theme or something, so there's a few other options there as well. And again, I will say though, keep in mind that this is like, it was mostly just built for me to look at my plugin, so it's not super user friendly in terms of it's how my brain works, and so that's not very intuitive to a lot of people. So there's a lot of stuff in here that's a little bit confusing, but yeah, it does what I need.
So where does this ease and bounce come from? Is this just the usage of your ease and bounce, or?
So basically, because I'll often reference the same things in multiple places, I just tend to have them all here as like snippets that are each different variation. And so the way it works basically is a code snippet has a bunch of different segments or fragments. And so in this case, you can see in the bottom, if you look at the card, the blue card in the bottom left, you'll notice it actually has 3 little underneath it, in, out, and in, out. There's the 3 segments or the 3 scripts that are associated with it.
Cool.
Or in the case of easing Apple, you can see there's actually 3 plus 1 more, so there's 4. And then, so each one will tell you how many fragments are in it, and then you can look at the fragments here in the
I was just going to say, this is basically something you would do in DoTween, and then I go, oh, here we go.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Yeah. So if I felt like I'm doing something a lot, I'll copy it. And again, because it's not really like a full suite of tools for other people, some of these reference other libraries and plugins that I have. So some of them might not just out of the box work. They're more just sort of snippet examples and use cases. But there's enough there to sort of to play with, I guess.
Yeah, this is awesome.
A couple of other fun toys, I guess, is if you let's go with search for Git.
Git.
Yeah. And so my Git setup one there, for example. So in this one, it shows up on the right now because it's if the sidebars are open, it shows up in the sidebar. If the sidebar are closed, it shows up in the modal pop-up. And so if you scroll to the top of this, you'll notice here that this chunk here is sort of a Git file that I would use. But I've got a bunch of different settings. So for starters, this is Git attributes when I want to use that. And so if you click the header, it'll shrink it. Sorry, of the fragment itself, the Git attributes file. Yeah, or that, hit the arrow, yeah, same thing. Yeah, and so you can see I've got the Git attributes, the Git ignore, and then I have a link which basically shows you how in the terminal, on the third one, the download Git ignore and attributes, this just shows you how I use curl to just grab that directly from the so I don't actually go and download the file, because you find yourself adding the Git ignore and Git attributes so often. I just open up the command line, I can just paste that into the terminal, it'll drop into that folder a Git ignore file or Git attributes file. It's much faster than finding it and making it and doing a dot file or whatever. Or if you want to go even one step further, the last one is a PowerShell script I have, which basically will take a directory, find the Unity asset directory in it, drop the correct Git attributes and Git ignore into it, create a Git repo, set up Git LFS, commit the lot, and then you've now got a starting point for. So it basically is do this, you have a Git project. And what I do is I take this script, I put it into my a folder referenced in my path directory. I call it Git Unity. And then what I do is I open a folder and I write Git Unity, and it just goes, does all the stuff, sets up a Git repo, does the thing, and I don't think about it again. So I tend to build a lot of these sort of simple automation scripts. And then one other thing that might be fun to look at, if you hit the languages section, one of them there is Markdown. So the second from the bottom, I think. So this is a prime tween tutorial thing, because I keep using prime tween a lot, and I want to see basically what are their functions again. I can't remember. And so I have this little HTML document, which is basically, you're seeing it's rendered. And so if you look at the first icon in the top corner, it says a little code icon in the, hit that. That's basically a renderer that renders the HTML so you can actually see it as the document, and basically shows me this like to-do tutorial thing. And I have the same thing underneath for a Markdown document. So if you want to see it as Markdown instead, if you open up that one, that's the Markdown, and then again, it's you can switch between render mode or unrendered mode depending on how you want to see it. And so I put in a bunch of renderers to sort of show things under different views. And I've got the same thing for XML, for example. If you're looking at XML documents or JSON documents, you can either see it as the full chunk or collapsible sections in a nice little helper view, because actually themes, that's a good one. So if you close this and say theme, so let's do a search for themes. If you look for, let's look one of the JSON. Yeah, go to the JSON one, the green one. You know it says color coded too, so the green icons are JSON files. So now on the right, you've got this big JSON file, and that's sort of a bunch of standard UI themes. So if you wanted to integrate Darkula or Grovebox or whatever, it's preset thing for all of the colors that you would use for your UI. You can just say, that's the background, that's the foreground, that's the selection, that's the surface. And again, if you want to see it in a nicer form factor, hit that, and you'll get a nice little collapsible thing. And you can just slide the depth slider to sort of go up and back through the thing. So yeah, that's a couple of the things I added. And you'll notice on the bottom, the pathing shows you the routing to where you are. So you are in all snippets, all common, motion, and then easing, and it's filtered by Markdown at the moment. And so if you were to uncheck the filter by Markdown, you'll notice you'll get all of the easing functions back again. And so it's, again, it's kind of vaguely just for how I would use it. And also for the Control K, you see the text up there, it says press to control. That does the same. If you want to just click that, it saves having to go and find the Control K every time. So
that's awesome.
So yeah, there you go. So
that's tween is the non-allocating do tween, right?
Yes, there's actually an even faster one than prime tween, but prime tween is the right level of sort of comfort of usability and niceness. I think it's the second most performant tweening library currently available for Unity, but it's also the one that I just like in terms of it's comfortable. I still think do tween was a bit more user friendly, but the trade-offs are like it's not as good. So I'm a big fan of prime tween now. I use it for all of my tweening.
I'm using it in my Legends of Learning.
Yeah, but as you can see, like I also like it tweening for people who aren't familiar. Tweening, the entire like lerp function is literally the concept of start, end, minus, time minus end minus start. Like it's like it's a very short line. And so all of these easing functions demonstrate that sometimes you don't need an easing library. So I've got each easing function I would use here defined as either a actual single line of code or as a Bezier curve or something that I can then use. If I don't need a full tweening library and I just want to pass the number in and get the number eased out, I can just grab the literal snippet of code that would be the time by time for your your expos or whatever. So I basically just have a bunch of different ones here for my use cases.
Didn't Freya Homer do some in-depth lecture on lerp?
Yeah, in fact, that example of if you under the motion section, so if you go to click on motion rather than easing, if you go down one more. So see at the bottom there, there's motion, easing, and then motion. So you just click motion. And if you scroll up and then just close the motion, or actually here we go, look at the section. So you see all these different terms, bobbing up and down, move, directional, whatever. There's a bunch of easing ones, but if you close the motion section and close the easing section, so you'll notice there's 41 motion ones, and then 28 of those are easing. But if we just go to motion, so open motion again, and if you scroll down past the easing ones at the top, there's a bunch of other ones I have here for things like steering, smooth step, etc. And some of these are like, and that one there, smooth move to destination. If you hit that one and double click it, actually, that is the output of Freya's particular talk on the topic. It is the how do you smoothly move things using an exponential decay curve, and that's that exponential decay curve. So that is 100% in here as a one of the many useful features. You know.
This reminds me too of when I added the PID controller to my 3D space shooter tutorial, so you don't overshoot when you're pursuing a target.
Yep. And that's why underneath it, you'll actually see steering agents, and that's exactly what that is. That allows for steering agents that uses the Craig Reynolds Boyds that have arrive radiuses and lets you sort of avoid the overshoots. That's exactly that. It has the full steering forces and how I handle that and seek arrive exactly. So very much the same deal.
Cool. Now, we were talking about how Prime Tween is a non-allocating tween library. Have you used that Z-Link library that Gamedev did a video on? It's a non-allocating link.
Link, yeah, I've seen it. I don't. I mostly use Link for setting up in editor tooling or to sort of do an awake function for sort of filtering services and things. I don't find myself using Link enough for me to need it. And I find that every package is another thing to maintain. So if I was using a lot of it, I would. But if I find myself, if I'm at the point where Link is a problem for me, the answer to me isn't non-allocating Link. It's now we're just going to use a 1D array and like manually index. Like there's no, and given the power of a lot of AI tools, if I want to say, give me a floating index circular buffer, I can do that. And then I don't need to have a dedicated Link variant. So to me, it's a stop kind of halfway house gap that is good if you've got a lot of Link stuff and you want to sort of relatively smoothly transition. But if you're either going for Link when you need Link, not Link when you don't need Link, I find a partial Link doesn't really appeal to me too much.
Yep. Did you see he put out a new video today about generics and variant, covariant, contravariant?
Yeah, I can honestly say I think that's the best explanation of variants I've seen, because I've had a hard time myself trying to explain that. And there's tons of examples with animal and dog versus cat, and how do you explain? And the TLDR usually being that the friendly answer is if I have a collection of animal and I try to say assign a dog to it, and then I want to cast that array of animals back to cats, you can't because there's a dog in it, but you wouldn't know that. That's kind of like there's a level of this hidden transference of the concept in there, and I was kind of having a hard time explaining the differences, and so that I thought that was a very clean example, especially the highlighting of the in variant versus the covariant and why that's an issue. I still think it's a confusing topic in general. Like I think a lot of people are going to come away from it a bit head scratching, but it's yeah, it's a useful video. It's good to know. I do find though that most people probably won't get how to do it, but they'll find that their editor will shout at them. They'll basically, if they're writing code and it says this can be invariant, I'm like, oh, cool. You press the button, it'll add the keyword for you. It'll add in or out relative to what it needs to do if it notices the file is only one directional. And then if you end up using it bidirectionally for your generic, it'll say, I can't do this anymore. We'll have to remove that. So I find that it's useful to know and you should know it, but most of the time, if you don't think about it, the editor will tell you when it's relevant or not. So
yeah, somebody in the comments mentioned that they would see that their editor would tell them this can be covariant.
Covariant, yeah.
But they never understood. And they actually said they had tried to research it and what it means, and they could never find a good explanation to help them understand it.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah. It's a confusing one. I think just that's why I always go back to the very simple. A dog is an animal, cat is an animal, but a dog can't be a cat. And so having a collection of animals is going to lead to confusion. If it can be, you can't cross that boundary indefinitely. And so even if you don't know the exact where the confusion is, the short answer is if you have something shaped for cats, it can't fit dogs, and there's confusion there somewhere. That's enough to kind of vaguely give you an understanding that there's something wrong, but it'll kind of get you through most of the headaches, you know?
Yeah. Well, let's see. I was sharing your.
Oh, you can look at the videos one. Have you seen that, by the way?
No,
the videos page. Okay, then you might enjoy that too. At the top of that page is the link to the videos page.
All right, let me share again.
I'm not really doing a full publicity thing on it, but I just thought it'd be kind of funny to hear that my phone. So if you click videos, this is a separate web app, which is basically, and again, I'm only about, I'd say 20% of the stuff loaded in. So this is various videos I've worked on in the past, and you can see along the top whether it's on different topics and whether it's a main channel video or a second channel video, whether it's about workflow stuff, whether it's something that I worked on with other people, or whether it's something I made, whether it's about Unity, whether it's me explaining how something works, etc., etc. And so if you go, for example, to main channel, so my main channel videos are there. Yeah, and then go to arrays in Unity, for example. Actually, go to Eagle. Yeah, Eagle is a good one there, bottom left.
This one?
Yeah, yeah. So you'll see here, this is the Eagle video, and you got a bunch of tags for it. You've got video information, and I'm generating the key takeaways of what I discussed in the video. I have timestamps for the different parts of it, and then there's also the like related links. And so if you want to know what I'm talking about, it gives you a link to the Eagle website, and then there's the full transcript as well. So it feels like a bit of an easier way to sort of view through, and then all of the tags. Clearly a sizing issue there on the monitor, but basically they're all the tags for the individual parts of the video. And it's all relatively automated. I have it set up with what's called a headless CMS. And so the reason I did that is I can go in now, and if I want to add links to videos, if I direct people to this page, it'll always be up to date with whatever the latest video links of things I reference are, and stuff like that. And so, yeah, you'll like, there we go, links to the Eagle website. Speaking of links, actually, if you like the links, if you go to the links page, the top, this is something else I'm kind of vaguely working on. People often ask me, it's like, oh, what is that software you use? Or what do you do for this? I'm like, I never have a place to say it's this one. And so I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm just going to, over time, fill in all of the bookmarks and links of things I like that are currently existing mostly in Eagle. And so while there is mostly videos here, because I've linked all my own stuff already, but if you scroll to the top, you'll notice the very first category set is whether it's something that is a recommendation. So that's just a general, like, not mine, just something I found online I like. For example, Steam Capsule is a great website for looking at different Steam capsules for comparing and examples of them. Or if it's not that, you can, the next tab over is stuff that I directly made myself, which is all of my primary channel videos or links to my website or whatever. And then worked on is stuff that I've worked on that isn't my things. And so I'm currently adding all of my portfolio work from old projects, so client projects or games I've worked on and things. So over time, this will be a lot more robust of a list of all of those things. And then underneath that, you've got all the subfilters of whether or not it's covering different topics or about certain software or so on. And so you'll see there's like, what is it discussing in that particular video and so on. So yeah. Oh, and then the top right button is a share filters. So whatever current state the page is on, you can grab that. And if you want to send someone to, like, I'm going to use that next time someone says, oh, I hear you've talked about design patterns. And if I'm oh, here's everything I've ever covered, whether it's a recommendation, whether it's a website, whether it's mine, whether it's a video on the topic of the single responsibility principle, click button, share link. It'll make life a lot easier for people going forward. So again, keep in mind, all of these websites are put together in about 5 days, and so they're a little bit rough around the edges, but the idea is there, and I'm going to play with them later. Oh, and the top as well, by the way, if anyone's curious, you've got the subscribe button. You can email address to subscribe to a newsletter there. You've got the book a meeting thing, where if you just click that button, it'll bring up my Calendly link, and it'll let you put something on my calendar. And the support me. So the top bar, all three of those are options to contact me in various ways. So yeah, like if you click either of those buttons, the book a meeting or the support, it'll bring up the like calendar import. You can just put a meeting on my calendar. And likewise with the support me, same thing. It goes to my Ko-fi and it'll give you access to the Discord and all of that. Oh, and the other one you might be interested in, although it's a little bit early days, if you scroll up and click on the home button, this is currently my blog posting page, and it's much simpler, but literally all I've got is the welcome to this website. I've made a video website. I've made a code snippet website, but over time, this is going to be a bit more like streams of consciousness, various things I'm working on. I've also got a different pipeline that is a public-facing version of Obsidian on my wiki page that I haven't quite gotten ready yet. That's wiki.jason-story.com, but I haven't put a link anywhere yet. And when that one's ready, it'll be like an Obsidian repo with all the links and cross sections of whatever I'm currently working on.
Yeah, one of the guys in my mastermind group, Klaus, he's in Germany. He's doing something like that with Obsidian and some web-facing stuff, exposing it.
Yeah, I can show you actually. Again, it's wiki.jason-story.com. So you can just replace the first word with wiki. It'll be in the URL. All of my stuff is going to have that pattern going forward. So it's videos.jasonstory, code JSON-story, and wiki. Yeah. So it's a bit early days again too, but it's just basically a pre-compiled static Obsidian repository that shows all the stuff. It has the graph, it has the sidebar, it has the search. And so when I have a more abstract network of ideas where I'm describing different topics, probably more game design related, I'll probably put it in here. And yeah.
Cool.
So it was kind of fun. Like I said, I haven't had a website for years, and so at one stage I was just going, I've just had enough. I need to sit down and do this properly. And so I blanketed a week on my calendar and said, we're gonna relearn web dev, we're gonna buy some domains, we're gonna set up some URLs, we're gonna do the whole lot. And I can now happily say it's all in place. They're all mostly empty, but they're all done and finished for the most part. And now I just have to go and actually plumb all the content when I have enough time.
I should rework my website. I did this totally by hand. So it's very unfancy. Mainly I have a link to the games that I've made and published, and also my projects that I've done for like tutorials and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
well, the big thing that I kind of like about what I was describing there is I'm using, again, what I said is a headless CMS. Mm-hmm. And the really powerful thing about that is it's not tied to any website. So there's an API I can call that accesses all of my data using queries. And that means that I can build any website I like or any app, which means I actually have 3 lines of code that connect all that data you saw across all those websites. They can be pulled into Unity from 3 lines of code. And that means that I could build Unity plugins with all the same stuff. And when I was originally doing this back in the day, as you know yourself, the laborious part of writing your own HTML tags for each new entity means that you're kind of less incentivized to go in and add more stuff. Or if you're not doing that, you're using WordPress and you have to use their clunky system for various different web pages. And I just found that if the tooling isn't there, you're less likely to actually do things on your website. It's a pain in the ass.
Dude,
and so now
I'm hosted mine.
Go on. How are you doing it?
It's a static site on S3.
Yeah.
Yep. And I'm using CloudFront so I can have HTTPS. And I actually didn't need to do that. I ended up doing that because I thought I had to do that to host my prototypes for Legends of Learning so I could load them into their harness. But I actually don't need to do that. I can just run it in the editor and then take the link that Unity gives me for the local host for that and paste it into their harness, and it'll work.
Yeah, I've got a 2-phase thing. If I want to add new content, I go to admin.jason-story.com, and it's a Google login, so other people can't access it. They can try, but they won't let them in. And then that goes to my Sanity dashboard, which is the tool I'm using. And I can I've built a custom dashboard, which has YouTube videos, code snippets. I just pick the tab, add entries. I've got all the rules in place for searches, for like linking other elements. I connect all the things I want, save it, and it just appears in all the sites. And then if I want to update the site itself, I have a Git repo locally in my machine. I make changes to the site. I click publish. It publishes to Git. Git causes a hook, which tells Vercel to republish. So I can I either add content, no rebuild, or I rebuild the code and it instantly republishes on the site. So it's very much, I'm very much anti-friction, and this is purely because I know that if it is there, I won't do it. For years, I put off doing things, and so the fact that like yesterday I had I added that the WizTree link article onto that page because I was like, oh, I'm using this tool right now. I should add it to my website. And I went click, add, done. Don't think about it again. And I wouldn't have done that before. And now as I find new tools or I'm in the middle of doing something, I'm like, oh, people might find this interesting. It's now less than like 2 clicks away for me to add it to my site. And that to me is a very useful tool because I just find, again, I won't do it otherwise, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, when I want to make changes to this, I got to load it up in VS Code, manually make my changes, use WinSCP to FTP it up to S3, and then I've got to go refresh the CloudFront so that the updates show up.
Yeah.
I have to invalidate the CloudFront cache.
That admittedly is always a pain too, where you have to deal with the cache busting, which is one of the nice things about using a host like Vercel. They handle all of that for you. And what's also really cool is because I have my domains name servered over to Vercel, I can swap them around. And so I actually have a new domain which I'm going to use for my business work going forward. It's called Improve Stuff. So improvestuff.com will be my sort of more branded contracting name rather than just using my old stuff. And so my email is going to be jason@improvestuff.com. And I'm going to have a big fancy portfolio web page with all the fancy animations that you're supposed to have for a portfolio page. But for now, I was able to just click 2 buttons and say, just have it point at my normal blog website for now until I get around to it. And so the level of flexibility and all that is very nice.
Cool. Did I ever show you my astrophotography stuff?
No, you haven't.
So I used to be really into astronomy and astrophotography, but you got to stay up late at night out in the cold weather.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, so I sold all my gear, but these are some images that I've captured.
I'm still just seeing the main webpage, by the way, if you're sharing.
What's that?
I'm still just seeing the yellow hobbies and interest page if you're sharing.
Oh, I know why. Because I was sharing a tab.
There we go. Perfect.
So yeah, I host my images on AstroBin.
I've never heard of that, but it's cool.
Yeah, it's a site for astronomers to post their pictures, and it will based on the stars, it will find whatever object it is and fill in all the metadata and stuff for that object.
That's very cool.
And then I just need to put in like what gear I used.
And I guess the longitude and latitude is built into the picture, right? If you're taking depending on the equipment or.
Yeah. So I've captured galaxies, nebula. Let's see, collections.
Well, some of those are very cool, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had 2 telescopes. One was my primary imaging scope, which was this.
That's a big beast of a machine there.
Yeah. So I used to have a 12-inch Dobsonian, it looked like a hot water heater.
Yeah.
But this scope here it's like a Schmidt-Cassegrain refractor. It's an RC, it's called. But then this guy here, this is an 80 millimeter refractor. And I can image with this, but it's very wide field. So it's great for like imaging like the Andromeda Galaxy, which is so huge.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can image it with your DSLR, right?
Yeah.
But I can use it as a guide scope. So when you're capturing images, you got to open up your shutter for minutes, maybe 6 minutes, 10 minutes, and do like several of those over the course of hours, right? Well, if you're going to open your shutter up for more than a few seconds, you've got to accurately match the rotation of the Earth. Mm-hmm. So the mount itself is motorized, and you polar align it so as closely as you can. It will just automatically match the rotation of the Earth, but it's still not perfect. So there is a guide scope. So I have my imaging camera here, which is the DSLR. But then this camera here is a CCD camera that I don't image with. All it does is I pick a star and I say, if this star moves,
it's a tracking.
Send some instructions to the mount to bring it back in. And so at first it will calibrate the mount by sending a series of instructions and see where it moves. And then there's like a graph you can see where you can plot any errors in the tracking, and it'll show you any adjustments it had to make. But when I got the thing dialed in, I could sit there and do, 30 10-minute exposures.
It's cool. It reminds me of the I have an Edelkrone gimbal for like doing the proper like multi-axis camera gimbal stuff, and it's just always fascinating watching those like self-correcting tools that have moving parts. Very fascinating.
But this hobby, it appealed to my nerdy, geeky, techie side and my artistic, creative side. Mm-hmm. And, once you capture all that image, all those frames, you then have to align them and stack them using software. But then you'd get something that you can't even really see. It's almost completely buried in the background. So you've got to start using like Photoshop to do a bunch of levels and curves adjustments to kind of pull it up out of the noise.
Pull the saturation up, add the, exactly.
And so there's a whole lot of post-processing involved. So yeah,
I've done a good bit of that back in Lightroom back in the day. Yeah, you had to give yourself more dynamic range for those. And even my camera here actually, probably can't tell, but this is actually recording in closer to log. So for example, very similar, if I turn off the post-processing, the footage is a lot grayer. And so a lot of the processing you're seeing is sort of more dynamic processing I'm putting on purpose to pull up the image for whatever. So I'm doing that with this stuff too, but I know what you mean. It's very much
you create a LUT basically on your desired image.
Exactly, yeah. That's one of those things that I think a lot of people don't appreciate with these kinds of things, is they think when you take a photo, it's like, oh, that's what it really looks like. There's no, even in astrophotography, there's no such thing as what it really looks like. Everything is a subjective choice of how you choose to render it, which wavelengths you're covering, to what ranges, to what colors, and it's stylistic. And it's the same with even audio capture. People don't realize that when people say they capture like sounds from the universe, you have to process it. You get to decide what that's like by how you're filtering it and how you're processing it.
Yeah. That was the Dobsonian I used to have. It looks like a hot water heater. And that was great for like what they call star parties, where the public will come and look through other people's scopes. And this had go-to and tracking. So I could put it on Saturn or something. And it would keep it in the eyepiece. And I'd have a line of people waiting to look through the eyepiece. And I didn't have to worry about, oh, no, it moved out. Let me find it again. You know, it kept it centered in the eyepiece for everybody wanted to come look through it. So that was cool. I won 2 or 3 photo contests with this time-lapse image here.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Time-lapse photos are always fascinating. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, so you got the star trails, and you can see where in between frames there'd be like gaps. Like this is an airplane. So RDU Airport, Raleigh-Durham Airport is over here. And so planes are taking off and landing. And then you had a boat going across the lake. And then you had cars going across this bridge. But these gaps in the trails were in between frames. And so I basically just took a bunch of frames. And then I used something called star stacks, I think, that would just put them all together in one image. Not aligning and stacking like you would do. So I could also process another way, where instead of doing the star trails, the terrain would actually move, but the stars would stay stationary.
Yeah.
Which is how I would process most of my astrophotography images. They would align the celestial objects so they're always in the same position relative to one another, and then it would just error out all the noise.
Yeah.
That came in between, because there's a lot of turbulence in the atmosphere, especially for planetary stuff, like the planetary images I shot. Jupiter, Saturn. I think Saturn's maybe one of my favorite. So the way I captured this was in a Dobsonian that didn't even have tracking. I just shot like 90 seconds of video, like a bunch of maybe, I don't know what the duration of each frame was, but it was just video for like 90 seconds. And then I fed that video into some software that would align all the frames. Well, first of all, I had to go through and I found a reference frame that was like the best quality frame. Because if you looked at the video, it's coming in and out of focus as the atmosphere is all that turbulence and stuff. I picked the best one, and then I said, only give me the frames that are like within 90% of this frame here. That's my reference frame. And then it would filter out a bunch of them. And then it did the aligning and stacking. And then I could bring it into Photoshop and post-process it. So it was fun.
It's very cool. Photography is one of those things that I'm a bit of a novice on for a lot of this stuff. I only know enough to get by with my own YouTubing stuff. But I'm always fascinated by those sort of exposure lengths and light capture and how much you open the aperture for. And like a good example of this is there's some really great videos talking about helicopter blades and how if you can align the frame rate to match, the blades will be stationary inside the footage, because again, you're capturing the rate of rotation. And so there's, I think, Michael, what is it? Scott, I forgot his name, but that guy, the red shirt guy, he basically has a video where he does this, where he has like, you can see the helicopter and you can watch as he's dialing it in, trying to get it just right. And he gets the helicopter blades to like freeze in midair, and it looks like a magic trick. And it's, again, it's just a matter of perception and how we're capturing the frames.
Yeah, I remember going to a science museum and they had like a spigot with water. I don't remember if the water was dripping really fast or running slowly. I don't remember. The water is coming out of the spigot, and there was a strobe light. And you could adjust the speed of the strobe light, and you would get it to where the drops would freeze, and then you can make them go backwards.
Laminar flow, laminar flow is fascinating. Yeah, it's just it makes it look like you're rewinding time. It's very cool. Yeah.
Yep. Well, cool. Any other?
I think we got through a lot. No, I think that's it. I think we covered quite a lot of stuff. It was fun catching up, and like you said, scratched that itch for a bit of chatting for a while. So I think I've had my break. I have to get back to work now. I've got some
I need
game
to
jam
get
work
working on my GDD. It's due on Wednesday.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Oh, somebody asked, what headless CMS framework are you using? That was from the Polygot programmer. And then somebody else asked, is Jason Storey showed a code snippet to the other Jason with a good use of event buses? I actually used one for a Paul system recently, so there's good uses in his humble opinion.
Yeah, there's probably some in there. I think I'm not sure if I've gotten to the event section of my code snippet library yet, but when it's there, I'm sure I'll point Jason in that vague direction. I use something called sanity.io. I've looked at a few different options, and I found that right now it seems like for database stuff that's lightweight, I'm likely to use Convex for my database, and then for personal content management, Sanity.io is the one I would probably go with. Although to be fair, I've been back in web dev all of 1 week. So this is only like a week's worth of research. And the technology has moved so fast from when I was doing this that I'm just enamored by every tool that I think it's all amazing. So right now, the one I'm really struggling with is how I want to handle authentication. I used to use Auth0 back in the day, but it was a real pain. And now I'm kind of under my research, I've established it's either Clerker or Work OS are the two sort of best options for most painless solutions to handling your account management stuff. So if I was to make an app with accounts and login, those are the two I'm looking at, but I don't know the space well enough to have made preferences. So I would say caution in terms of that. Do your own research, because I can't really vouch. I've only used these things a week and a bit. So, but I will say, personally, I'm pretty locked in on Sanity does everything I want and more. Things I didn't even think I wanted. I was like, okay, this is very much what I want. It even has support for Grok and not Grok the AI, Grok the language for filtering, as well as GraphQL. And it allows for like really granular queries that return JSON models. And so for someone like me that does a lot of data-driven things, I can literally make a data model for whatever I want, save it, create matching data models in Unity, C# and Python, and I can then now access any of my content. And it's all hosted on what they call as data sets. And so data sets have your ID, your authentication. And so I can basically build different authenticated data sets for stuff. Yeah, I will say the only trade-off is, unlike other tools, like, again, using WordPress or something, the entire CMS side is managed, which means you don't have to write any code to add stuff. You basically drag and drop, use the WYSIWYG editors. The way Sanity works is you literally pull down a TypeScript project. You then make changes where you actually define schemas. You literally kind of like interface types for your entities in your system. Then you push that up and it generates a web page with your entity configurations and the relations. Like, this is related to this. A video has a link. Links have images and tags, etc., etc. And then you've got a publicly exposed loginable account that you can then distribute to your team to modify and change. So I will say, if you're not comfortable augmenting an actual TypeScript website to build the schemas itself, it might be a bit overwhelming. But for me, that's the joy, because it means I can decide I want to start including I don't know, maybe I want to do movie reviews. I can literally make a new entity called movie review. I can say it has a type of link, it has a type of image. I can then connect it to my existing system. I can then now do searches for my existing links, or I can add new links, I can add tags, and it just seamlessly works with the rest of my stuff. And I can add validation rules. I can even then write my own APIs. So when I type in an ID, it'll pull the information from TV database or movie database, pull the info in, fill in all the fields. I can then use AI to generate summaries for like the snippets, for example. I didn't write out a 2-line snippet for every single snippet I've got in my huge collection. I just said, generate me a very small blurb so I don't have to explain what every snippet does. And it did that for me. And so I can build automation pipelines. And so it means the act of adding new content becomes easier and easier. And so again, it's a tool-driven solution to data management. And so if you're up for that, I think that's where the strength is. But it is very much like you're building a website to manage your data, and that can be a step too far for some people. So
yeah, I definitely would prefer that for maintaining a website, just because it's such a pain, like, to go and edit a static site, and it's demotivating. That's why I haven't updated it much.
Even the blog post you saw on that first page, that's a markdown blob. So I literally write an article in Obsidian, I copy and paste it into the website, it's there, and then at the bottom I say related links, and I just type a search into my own database of links, and I go, this is related to these 4 topics, drops them in, the links show up at the bottom of the page, all the links have tags, which then mean if you click the tag, it goes back to the links page and shows you all related tags to that, all links to that tag. And so it's very fun knowing that I can decide a code snippet links to one of my videos, or a video is about a topic, and I know that if someone clicks on any part of those on any one of my connected websites, they'll get routed to the appropriate places, and I don't have to remember to post links everywhere. And going forward, what I'm going to do as well is I'm no longer going to put links in the videos as like, here's what I talked about or references. I'm going to link to that video's matching page on my website. And then if I update or I add more links, or I'm like, oh, this is outdated info, here's the new version, or by the way, I made another video that covers this as the API changed, they'll seamlessly get access to all of that without me having to hunt back old videos and change descriptions and whatnot. So I definitely think it's a good direction to go in.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how long did you spend putting that together?
The first day was me learning what the hell the concept of React and Tailwind was. Then I had some basic template websites up and running. Day 2 was me learning how to do Vercel publishing and deployments and get all that working. Day 3 was me setting up Cursor and building up a basic templating websites, but then wanting data. And then day 4 was me kind of going, let's learn what Sanity is. And then Sanity was such a fun toy. I spent an entire second day on Sanity, adding all the different stuff and fun toys with it. And then one more day after that was me going, right, let's just tidy it up a bit, tie it all together. And that was sort of the rough plumbing for the existing websites. And then I probably spent half a day on the snippet site, just sort of polishing a little bit. So
that's very impressive.
Well, to be fair, I can't claim a lot of the credit because I used to do websites 9 years ago. So I had a foundation for what was there. And then the beauty of the modern AI stuff is I can literally say, so this is what I actually did, by the way, is a good suggestion. Because I had knowledge up to a point, I didn't have to start from zero. I wrote a giant blurb into Gemini and said, I used to do web dev. Back in my day, it was this with these tools, with this stuff, and here's how we did it, and here's the tech I would use. And personally, I favored this solution, and I like to use Angular because I really liked how it had the client and server-side stuff. I like the modularity. Nowadays, how do people do it? And so it was able to give me a upgrade path that would not just tell me what to use. It would say, these days, people favor Vue or React. And if you're doing this, you would. So I got to skip, but I would like, if it was me from scratch going, learn how to do this stuff, I'm sure it would have taken me a month or so just to get up to date with things. But the fact that I could say, given where I was, given what I missed, give me a learning path to get there, it was much easier for me to sort of ease my way into the newer tools. So.
Still impressive. Yeah, that reminds me in Bezi, I had posted to their Discord that I was a little annoyed that it would not adhere to my coding standards. And every time I generated something new, it would not use my styles and stuff. They told me I could create a rules file, add it to my project, and just tag that in my prompts. And it would follow those for every new prompt going forward. So I haven't had a chance to test that yet, but it sounds like what you did where you gave Gemini, this is how I used to do it. This is what I preferred. This is my, and kind of gave it the ground rules.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that's why I use specifically my local LLM solution is I use Misty. So MSTY is the host provider. It's it's LM Studio, but from someone else. It's a very similar concept. But the reason I like it is it's very configurable locally. So it stores my data in a SQLite database that I can control my own stuff, and you can preset a lot of prompt stuff. And one thing that people don't realize with this is how important the system prompt is. The system prompt is fundamentally going to change the kind of responses you get. The example I'll give you is you could ask an innocuous question like, give me a good breakfast meal. Now, if you're saying you are a Michelin star chef, it'll give you a good, quote unquote, fancy breakfast meal. If you say you are a nutritionist focusing on gluten-free stuff, it'll give you very different answers. And so people often forget to give it the context of who it's supposed to be responding as, because it is someone with multiple personalities. And so I find that a lot of people forget to add that initial context to make sure the alignment is correct. And so to your point, I have a lot of that. I have a bunch of files where it's like, here's my coding standards, here's what I like, here's what I don't. Here is a code file where I'm in a very performance-oriented mode. It says, do not generate garbage. Do not use these things. Favor, I have all these. Then I have a different one for, I want to be creative. Favor modularity interface. And I have these different kind of mode sets. And so I can basically say, I'm going to make a system and I want you to lean into more interface heavy stuff because I want to play around. Or I want you to give me more of a hyper-focused, really like over-engineer, but for performance concerns, don't use compound types, use flat arrays for various stuff, and I can get completely different results from the exact same questions because I'm like tailoring it to exactly what I want. So I would say it's worth sitting down and thinking about the sort of personality categories you want for the stuff and building these config files and then using them as your sort of presets, and you'll find alignment will be a lot easier. Yeah. Some people think you can just rely on it over time, like getting better by adding stuff, but I just found that doesn't work. I personally, I will literally wipe it regularly. Every 20 messages or 10 messages, I'll go 0, give it a new refresh, say, we're here, this is what we're doing, start from here and do this. I don't rely on it like retaining memory because it just, the more info, it starts to get confused on stuff. And so what I'll often do is say, summarize where we are, give me a new thing. I'll take the summary, read the summary to the next refreshed one, then add my context on top of it. And now it's like, we are doing this is where we were, this is how I want you to act. Go. And I find that it's a little bit more laborious that way, but you get much tighter, better responses.
Yeah, they tend to get a little worse in long chats.
Yeah. Although the next step, I don't want to go into a whole other tangent because I haven't really got time, but I will just allude to it. The next big thing is this thing called MCPs. And I don't know if you're familiar with the idea, but it's basically this thing called model context protocols. And it's a fancy way of saying there's all this agentic AI stuff where there's like entire platforms built over it. But it's kind of pointless because at the end of the day, all it needs is to know what tools are available. And so what MCP says, you can call it endpoint. The endpoint will give you a little JSON file that says, this is file system. It has access to get file, list file, save file, load file. And these are the contracts like a REST API. And it has the same thing for all the different platforms. And different providers have them. So you can have one for Google Drive, one for Sanity, one for your file system, one for whatever. And all you do is you append these MCP like tools, and it becomes a tool set that the AI has. And so you can use any AI with it. And so rather than relying on a particular provider, I have this set up with my Misty local. So I can say, pick Gemini or Claude or ChatGPT, and then say, I'm going to give you access to this folder of files, this web API, my Sanity database in read-only mode, whatever I want. I can then ask it stuff, or even my calendar, and I can say, tell me what I have to do this week and add this to my calendar. And so you can have actionable AIs from any of the categories, provided you're willing to set this up. And it's all just done from like Node, effectively. It's like a Node configuration with this little configuration file and a local running server. And so that's going to be the next big thing, is that going one step further, rather than paying for specific integrations with Unity in terms of Bezier or whatever, it'll just be a case of, I built a Unity integration that connects to my computer, has access to this, get files in project, add file, create asset, create mono behavior, whatever it is, and you'll just expose that, and you can then talk back and forth with it. And so I kind of see that being the future of like, there's going to be an awful lot of like online subscribable MCP solutions, and you just attach them to whatever chat you're doing, and you can integrate with all these different services. So I have a feeling that's where this is all going, and it's probably going to be soon-ish that this will kind of hit the normal lexicon. People will be talking about what tools or what MCPs are they including in their AIs, you know.
Cool. Well, anything you want to say in closing?
I guess check if you liked any of the website stuff, check it out. Like I said, at the top of my website, there's a subscribe to a newsletter. It doesn't do anything at the moment, but like I'm collecting emails for when I am releasing things. There is a set of meeting on my calendar if you want to book a call with me. There's different like options for paid tiers for like consulting things. And then, yeah, subscribe on Ko-fi if you want and get access to the Discord. They're sort of the big three at the top of my website. So
Cool.
that's it.
Well, man, I really enjoyed hanging out and chatting with you.
Fun as always.
Always a pleasure. So hopefully we can get on the Game Dev show again sometime. I don't
Yeah.
Jason's pretty busy, but
he is. Yeah.
Anyway, thanks again. And for everybody that hung out and watched, thanks for watching. And y'all enjoy your game development journey.
See you next time.